I'm Dan.
And I'm Alex.
And welcome back to On Air, everybody. How you doing, Alex? It's good to see you again.
Oh, good. Everything is well, thank you. How are you?
I am great. I'm back from a hectic trip to Bulgaria and then flying Lufthansa and then going to India. So now I'm a bit more zen, trying to recover from all the less than ideal sleep nights.
I was looking at this, sifting through the YouTube comments of your latest video of the Lufthansa Allegris. Now, of course, I'm sifting through trying to find the negative ones, right? So I can like
to
them.
thumbs up.
But there were not many, to my disappointment, but there were so many that were commenting that apparently that was the most highly anticipated YouTube video. People were declaring of the year, 6 weeks into 2025. Makes me realize how, kind of a big deal that for the context, for anyone that has no clue what I'm talking about, Dan was one of the first people in the world to at least document by video flying Lufthansa Allegris, the 7-year late first class project debuting on an A350.
Yeah, to be fair, the business class is what's 7 years delayed. They didn't announce that first class until a couple of years ago. So it's part of Allegris, but it's Allegris First Class. So it's different. And I don't think they would have introduced that type of seat 7 years ago. So I'm glad they didn't reveal it then, but they waited and gave us something so amazing now.
You're right, because 7 years ago, the highlight was that middle throne seat, wasn't it, in business class, where it was that weird kind of central seat with loads of kind of shell hardware around it.
Exactly. And in fact, perhaps even 7 years ago, the outlook on first class looked very different because I feel like mid to late 2010s was truly the era of every airline hating first class, wanting to get rid of it, seeing no future. Business class is the way. So I'm glad in a way that the pandemic made airlines have a look at there still being some value in first class, even with tiny cabins, like 3 or 4 seats. And that's what probably resulted in this. If I think it was revealed in 2023, so that would give them, if they had a few years development time, it probably might have started right before COVID. I don't know what the development timeline was, but definitely later than business.
And it was on an A350. It is debuting on an A350. What was the route that you had flown this aircraft?
Munich to Bangalore.
Okay, right. So, because for a minute I know it goes to Vancouver as well, but I know that you were not just in Canada.
But their Allegris business goes there, not their first class.
Not the first. Okay.
So the first class goes to New York, somewhere else in the US, but both the US routes, I think it's maybe Chicago, both of those are literally outrageously expensive. And then it goes to Bangalore, which is still very expensive, but slightly cheaper. So that's why I did that. Also, it's a slightly longer flight, which I liked as well. Or maybe it's not actually this time of year with the transatlantic winds. But anyway, This was my first time, if I remember correctly, flying first class on an A350 because although the A350 is such an amazing aircraft, very, very few airlines have first class on it, right?
Yeah, you're right. And it's funny because for example, all of the A350 deliveries that I've been a part of, and I was a part of so many when there was that period where month after month a new airline was becoming the first operator, everyone from kind of Thai all the way down to JAL and Asiana. There were tons, French B, Air Caraïbes, Air France, British Airways, obviously the Middle East carriers and so on. Most of them without first, as you said, because the direction and the way air travel and everything has shifted, as we've discussed on here before. Airlines have invested in better business class products that have closed that gap. What really struck me, and I bet you can resonate with this, having now flown Lufthansa Allegris with a massive first class not in terms of capacity, but in terms of just the scale and size of the seat and the monument itself, is when I boarded JAL's A350-1000 and I was standing in the first class, I could not believe we were on an A350. I was thinking everything about it felt like an A380. It just felt all too big and unfamiliar for it to be a 350 with the absence of lockers and the overhead design being so different and all of that. when I watched your YouTube video, that's what I was reminded of. So how did that actually feel as the passenger?
So I haven't flown JAL's A350 first class yet. I'm hoping to soon, which looks incredible. But
Yeah.
I think, did you watch the whole video all the way to the end? Be honest.
I did.
So
I
you
did.
saw when I spoke about how my very first feeling when I boarded was there's something off about this, because
Yeah.
the crew rest, especially in the middle, extending 2/3 of the way over the center seat, that removed any possible A380 feeling. And even there were no lockers on any side, but just the whole ceiling being so random and not matching how the cabin was configured made it didn't give that A380 feeling. It felt a bit strange.
JAL's A350 did not have that, or not at least that I can recall. I did not notice all those irregularities in the design of the. It's a Lufthansa thing for sure. And when I watched the video, I was thinking, oh my God, the cabin's not symmetrical. There's just so many cut-ins and cutouts, and looking away from the navy and the aesthetically pleasing elements of the cabin, and doing what you and I do, where we're looking at where the cabin ceiling meets the air vents and all that kind of stuff. It looks so messy.
Yeah. But the seat itself, which is ultimately the important thing, is incredible. And I very rarely meet people who fly first class, especially who have flown multiple. Last night, I happened to meet the dad of a friend who has flown almost every major first class. I had no idea about this. So he was asking me about Allegris, about my experience on this flight. And I was like, it's fantastic, blah, blah, blah. And then he said something like, I saw a photo. I thought it looked a bit, there's no separate bed. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's incredible. Like, of course, you don't need a separate bed. And he was like, no, I prefer a separate bed, like very seriously. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like, you are the top 0.000% of air travelers who would not be more
Singapore
than
Airlines
happy with this
entered
seat.
the chat. Yeah, exactly. God, that's interesting. But then what timing was your flight? Did you experience an overnight on board, or was it a daytime?
No, thank goodness it wasn't overnight. It was takeoff at 12, landing at 1 a.m. Indian time, but my body wasn't European time, so it was actually perfect.
So you got to fully enjoy it. Did you sleep?
No, I mean, I was paying a fortune for that ticket, so I'm not going to sleep. I did work on the video on the flight because I wanted to get it up as soon as possible. But it was amazing. And also, I love when you get a crew who's slightly more senior that we don't so often see in Asia or the Middle East, who is just the embodiment of those types of people who have been at the airline for 40 years. They know everything. They take such pride and pleasure in creating like a luxurious atmosphere. So it feels very different from when you get amazing service in Asia or the Middle East. Yeah. And it's more like, I think it's even more fun because you can tell they're just so passionate and excited about what they do,
Yeah. No, we've spoken before, haven't we, about the crew that we've met over the years that worked at the legacy carriers from prior to what they are now. And that's good. That's also nice that Lufthansa are making sure that they're allocating and assigning those crew onto those flights to be able to deliver a service, because expectations are high. I mean, okay, expectations are high, but then I would also argue that they are much lower to some extent for passengers knowing what, for example, Lufthansa has become over recent years. And I say that because look no further than in your video. Okay, guys, it's about 15 minutes in, maybe it's about 10 minutes in. Okay. Dan receives a hot towel with a rose petal, and the rose petal is enough to make him mind blown. I mean, he just loses his shit. He can't believe that he's like, oh my God, there's a rose petal. No, on an Asian carrier, Dan would have said, thank you for the hot towel, and proceeded to use the hot towel. On Lufthansa, he's like, whoa. So then I was like, okay, maybe there is an expectation imbalance there.
No, but to be fair, even on maybe besides Thai, which has given me orchids, I don't know if they do anymore, but getting even a rose petal, it's just, it doesn't matter at all. It's so unnecessary, but it's just a little touch that you're like, okay, this is nice. And you have to acknowledge when an airline, any little unnecessary extra thing that they do, that's what makes it fun to fly a premium cabin. You know, that's why we love airlines that have an elaborate pre-departure service, for example, because then you feel like you don't need to do this, but I love it just because it feels like you actually care and want to go one step further. So, I mean, shout out to Lufthansa.
Unlike Finnair, you don't have to worry so much about Lufthansa's financials. They're incredibly healthy. Even after acquiring the little Italian airline in its latest rendezvous as ITA, they're all right. They're very financially sound. You're good.
I'm not worried about that at all. One more thing I have to add is that the crew, it was actually every single crew member's first time working an Allegris flight. Even the pilots hadn't worked an Allegris first class flight before. So I think they were also extra excited because of that. And they loved that since I was the only one, there was that seat on the other side of the cabin, 1 kilo. And I could tell that they were kind of playing around with it during the flight because I was busy recording most of the time. Whenever I needed them, they came in a second. But I could tell they were testing everything out, reclining, trying to see how everything worked. So I mean, I was
just what you want on a first class flight. Hey, the crew playing around with the empty seat.
So no, I'm happy. I'm happy. How has your week been?
All good. Lots of travel as well. Funnily enough, right? I saw. We'll come to a discussion. Point about what happened on that weird Iberia flight that this passenger went nuts. And there's been a variety of unruly passenger examples and cases over the last week. I mean, it's like aviation. Like, can we have like a normal week? You know, the week before it was all that awful stuff, and then this week it's nut jobs and go. You know, it's like anyway. The reason why it got me thinking, and I was about to text you in the moment, and I thought I'll save it for the podcast, is I was on a flight to Paris from Heathrow. BA, super cool and efficient and organized. First wing, lovely. First lounge, galleries first, absolutely heaving. I mean, for some, April 1st can't come soon enough because that lounge is way too busy. By the way, and this is, I guess, another reason behind BA's decisions, okay? The lounge, unlike if you walk into the Lufthansa lounge, where it's full of businessmen and women, let's say it's 90% men and 10% women. Yeah. That's to do with the corporate world thing, not to do with frequent flyers, right? But where it's predominantly, you know, people suited up with their laptops, working, and individuals, it's just such a different story for BA. Like, walk into the BA Galleries First lounge in the middle of the day, as I did, and struggled to find anyone actually working on their laptop. It's just a big, beautiful mix of elderly couples, young families, not really with young kids, but maybe with older adult kids. Basically, everyone looking like these are premium leisure travelers, and seeing a fresh example of that so near to the decision of BA to try to eliminate a lot of that premium leisure travelers. That was kind of just an interesting bit of food for thought. Anyway, that wasn't my point. My point was, on the aircraft, okay, there were these 2 passengers that they were waiting for that were connecting in from Denver or somewhere. I think it was Denver. And when they boarded, okay, both of these passengers, again, this is nothing personal to them. We are simply stating a fact. They were incredibly on the larger side, okay, in terms of their physique, right? Fine. Each of them on either side of the exit row alone. So one of them on one exit and the other one on the other. Both of them probably double the size of the exit door on the overwing exit. There is no way that either of them would have fit through the overwing exit door. That would have been impossible. Not only would that have been, I guess, a concern for them if required, because that door wouldn't have been usable for them. The bit that I think that should have been a concern for everyone is they were, by sitting in that window seat on the exit row, on the overwing exit doors, responsible for operating, opening, and exiting through that door for the sake of everyone else. So I watched the CSD come over from the front to give the briefing. And he looked at them both and he said, just want to make sure you're both happy with the responsibility of this, which is standard. They do that for everyone. And they both said yes. And he said, okay, and you'd have to pull this off and throw it out if needs be. And they both said, okay. And again, this is all very standard. This wasn't just for them.
Yeah.
Anyone who's sitting in the exit row gets asked this. And then he said, he made a joke of, oh, okay, right, it's just a 6-week training course and then we'll be good to go. And they both laughed, haha, and they went on their way. And that was fine. And the CSD left and the passengers remained there. But I'm looking around and I can't help but think, but they don't fit, not even slightly. The door is half the size of them. I'm quite sure also they had an extra seat on either side next to them. I don't know if it was by chance or they'd paid for it. If it was for their comfort, great. That's very much allowed and within the rules. And I think that's an opportunity. Sometimes, if we've often said this, if there is a really low fare and you want that extra seat next to you, and let's say the fare is something like £25 or something, right? And the next seat is £25, go for it. It's better than paying for business class. But in this scenario, it was that weird thing where everyone's being too polite to avoid hurting someone's feelings when, God forbid, if required, both those exits wouldn't have worked because they don't. What do you do in that scenario? Like, it's of course, I didn't say anything. I'm not going to say anything. No, nobody else seemed to really notice, but it was one of those scenarios where if there was anything after, that would have been the conversation point. Oh, the reason why those two doors didn't open is because X, Y, Z. Don't you think there needs to be this? We don't need to worry about the feelings here.
Absolutely, because the same thing would apply if someone was too old, for example. If you have an 85-year-old sitting in the emergency exit, that would be questioned, even though being 85 is not a choice at all. No one can do anything about it. You might also want extra space for whatever reason at that age, but it's just a matter of safety. And, if anyone can sit in any seat they want besides an emergency exit, because that is an essential seat to be operated by someone who's physically capable. And even you have said, because you've actually opened an aircraft door or felt the weight of these emergency exits, it's very heavy. There's so many people who sit there
do you
who
remember
probably shouldn't be.
It's not just that it's heavy, right? It's the weird angle that you are at.
Yeah.
So difference when something's heavy and you bend down to lift up something.
Yeah.
But the fact that the door is both higher and lower than you, and you're expected to operate it, it's such an awkward distribution of weight that it feels even heavier as a result.
It's tough because I feel like they would, claim discrimination or something, which...
Right, that's the world we're in now.
Yeah, which I think the company, the responsible thing to do wherever you are is just to make sure this is only for the emergency exit. Make sure someone is actually physically capable of opening it, of not blocking it. And that applies to many different demographics. It's not only weight. It could be age, as I said, other handicaps. Even, for example, if I was sick, I wouldn't sit in the emergency exit because I know maybe I'm not at my top to be able to be alert and handle this in an emergency. So
and then I started to think maybe airlines need to stop marketing it as extra legroom, even though it is. Maybe they need to stop presenting it as a premium, right? So many airlines they're showing
that's so wrong, actually, to monetize the exit row.
That's exactly what they're doing. And they're not just monetizing it saying this is the exit row, it costs more. That when you click onto it or you hover over it, if you're going to choose, it will say extra leg room, this is charged at the same rate as the first row, this.
Yeah.
And so people, that's a great thing to get, with very little mention of the reality of the responsibility of that seat. The other thing I was thinking of is this. They were coming in from transit from I told you, from Denver, I think, right? So it's very likely that they had checked in all the way through to Paris from Denver and had a shorter connection in T5. So it means that they wouldn't have seen a check-in agent or anyone at Terminal 5, but rather only at Denver. Now, at Denver, when they give them both boarding passes, the third-party ground handling agent who works for a third party isn't recognizing that, for example, 11A or whatever it was is the exit row on the A320 that's going to operate to Charles de Gaulle that day, right? So that person doesn't care, right? It's not in their scope. So then they get their boarding pass. Then they get through T5. They go through security, flight connections. They get to the gate. Even at the gate, when they're cross-checking their passport with the boarding pass, and then checking, what group they're in for boarding and blah, blah, blah. Even the gate staff, of course, are not aware off the top of their head of what number the exit row is on that specific aircraft of that day. Remember, BA have got a mix of 319s, 320, 320 Neo, 321 Neo, and etc., right? So it predominantly only comes down to the crew on that flight on that day when they approach whoever is sat to give the mandatory briefing that is aviation law, to give that briefing, to then make that judgment and that assessment, to be able to, I guess, have the confidence, right, and the level-headedness and the respect for the job to be able to say, for whatever reason, you're not going to be able to sit here. That doesn't happen, I think, more often than not, and I think we know this. And I think one of the best points that we've made so far in the episode is that maybe it's time for airlines to stop monetizing this as some kind of luxury, as if it's extra legroom because they were generous about it and they want to make money from it. No, it's because you have a massive responsibility sitting in that seat.
I think that's actually a great takeaway from this discussion, and something I really haven't heard other people say, that the whole concept of monetizing an exit row that is supposed to be operated by people who are capable is just bizarre. And to market it as something premium is bizarre. In fact, if you think about it, they shouldn't really let people pre-assign those seats. They should be assigned at the airport so that they can make sure that the people sitting there are suitable for operating it. And not only in the window seat, but in the entire row, so that there's not, let's say, someone who's immobile in the aisle seat, for example, or someone who's very old. There's not a kid in one. I mean, I think they restrict kids in the entire row.
I think most of the time, even airline systems prevent. When they recognize it's a child trying to assign, it doesn't happen.
But this points to another thing about European aviation specifically, how there's no extra legroom seat options in the rest of the cabin. Even in business class, the legroom isn't great. But in the US, you have main cabin extra, or whatever, economy plus, whatever the different airlines call it, Delta Comfort Plus, where you have a few rows at the front. And if you want extra space, you sit there. And you don't also have to deal with the discomfort of an exit row where you have an immovable armrest, and you have some, there are some things that are worse
around you because they're up.
If airlines want to monetize, introduce a few more rows with extra legroom at the front, and people will be happy. But the reason they don't want to do that is because they know that could be sold as business, because they flex how big the business cabin is depending on demand. So why should we give them extra legroom when they're already paying for it? And then in economy class, it makes it difficult also if economy class passengers pay, and then more people book business, so the business class cabin size increases. But the same applies now if someone's booking the bulkhead in economy, needing to pay more. The quote bulkhead is actually just the first row. And then it gets moved back. So in turn, they lose their seat assignment. But interesting debate, and something that should be talked about more, I think.
The other part of that is that, for example, if, let's say, EasyJet with one full cabin, right, and one full economy class cabin, and they sell as a premium the first row. In fact, as a premium, they sell the first few rows not because they've got extra legroom, but because they include speedy boarding and a cabin bag, whatever, right? I remember having a conversation at the time with the CEO, Dame Carolyn McCall. She's now the boss of ITV in the UK. And asking Carolyn, knowing that they had built such a frequent flyer base, which at that point they had when they were less focused on holidays and more focused on capturing Monarch's passengers, capturing the premium leisure, the second home market, the people that were willing to pay a little bit more to fly EasyJet, but comfortably. Why not make the first, for example, 8 to 10 rows have 2 extra inches of legroom and genuinely market them as extra legroom seats, which they would have been. The response from Carolyn was that if they did that, it would have required them removing some seats from the back, right? And it would not have offset. It's still more financially profitable for them to squeeze in 3 extra rows at the back and get in passengers, even if they're on the lowest fare, than it would have been to, sell these, upselling ancillary extra legroom offerings.
That's really interesting. I wonder if it's because Europe in general is lower yield. People are used to paying lower fares. They don't want to add a premium because I think in the US, like a 2-hour flight, you'd pay about $50 for an extra legroom seat, which if you think about it, for a row of 3, that's $150. So yeah, it's not amazing. But if you think about, there's no additional cost, no additional weight, nothing to gaining that $150 versus having additional passengers, which adds weight, adds other costs to the operation. I don't know, but I guess, for example, $50 in Europe for a 2-hour flight wouldn't be so popular, perhaps.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Let's actually go to what happened. I'm going to bring it up on that Iberia flight. This went viral, understandably so, because the whole thing looked bizarre. But basically, a passenger on a full Iberia flight from Paris to Madrid attacked a cabin crew on board and managed to open one of the emergency exits before jumping onto the tarmac while the aircraft was taxiing. So basically, this flight left the gate in the evening. It was just getting dark. And as it was on a relatively short taxi to the runway, a passenger got up from his seat, made his way to the front of the aircraft, to the front galley, where he attempted to open the emergency exit. Of course, the cabin crew were trying to intervene, stop him. It became physical. One of the cabin crew ended up being assaulted by the passenger, which is awful. He was then successful at opening the emergency exit while the aircraft was moving. The engines were running, of course. The man then jumped with the door opening. The man jumped the 11.5 feet from the open door 1 exit to the tarmac before, of course, emergency responders and the police and everyone managed to get there and detain him and all of this. A few things I found funny. Firstly, the flight still departed fine just a couple of hours later. I mean, Iberia does have a very good on-time performance, so there is that. The aircraft was taken out of service only once it reached Madrid, so the flight was not cancelled. Now, I would have expected that it would need to have been cancelled, but I wasn't there as the maintenance official checking the state of the aircraft, so I trust that they took that decision. There's no word yet on whether or not the airline is going to press charges against the passenger. I mean, they should, and it's going to be for a lot if they do. And this is now the second time in 3 months that a passenger on board an Iberia aircraft has opened an emergency exit prior to takeoff for no apparent reason. What the hell is going on?
They just want some fresh air. Come on.
They just
give
boarded.
The people fresh. No, but I mean, this story, obviously the unwritten part is that this person has mental illness of some sort, presumably.
We're assuming.
Yeah.
We're assuming.
Because even someone who's drunk, I feel to act like this, it should be mental illness, but you never know. If they're drunk, 100%, get them in trouble. But it's so sad because obviously things like this will happen now and then with people who are mentally ill as well. There's nothing stopping someone with a psychosis or who's having a bipolar manic episode from flying, and it's horrible for everyone involved, most of all for that person. So, I just feel like this is such a sad story all around,
Can we also just reiterate at this point, in case anyone's nervous listening to this, that the exit doors cannot be opened once the aircraft is in flight. That's just physically impossible because of pressurization, and because the door on the outside is bigger than it is on the inside. So it's unable to be opened. No worries there. Of course, he was able to open the door because they were still on the ground. The cabin was not yet pressurized. The aircraft was not at altitude and so on. That's why that was able to happen.
Yeah, and thank goodness that if it was going to happen, thank goodness it happened on the ground, because even if he wouldn't have been able to open the exit, he could have tried to harm more crew, or it could have just ended up being a really dramatic scene. This was obviously still very dramatic, but at least he managed to get out. I just think this made me very sad, because I've had friends and family friends who have dealt with mental illness where I know they just behave completely irrationally. And you read this story and you think, who is this crazy person? But in fact, my first thought is, oh my God, like this person's family and everyone who's so worried about this person, and they're just, in this uncontrollable state, presumably. Imagine it comes out they were just super drunk. But I don't know.
Well, look, let's move on. I'm also, another thing that we were wanting to discuss, because I know that you must have had experiences like this, given that you've been absolutely everywhere around the world, right? And I say that because you have definitely been to more countries where this is more likely to happen than, for example, I have. And that is what Indonesia have jumped up to do. I'm going to bring it up so that I can make it. Jumped up to take action with, right? Which is that they are trying to take action to stop the corrupt bribery that is taking place at the border. What does that mean? So the Indonesian government have discovered that visitors to Indonesia through certain airports are subject to intimidation, kind of like the abuse of power, threats, specifically are asked for money in exchange for entering through immigration. So imagine you've got your visa, or you don't need a visa, your passport's valid, everything's fine. But when you get there and you're in that moment, and the decision as to whether or not you are going to enter the country lies between the conversation between yourself and that immigration officer. The immigration officer has this idea that you need to give $100 equivalent, or else you're not entering. And more often than not, that person's going to do it and not question whether or not that's actually the rule. They've discovered that this has happened. I mean, it's rife, right? And they've fired how many? 30
immigration officers, which is
officers.
A lot. And also we should specify that. We should specify that this was happening primarily to Chinese people. And the reason that this whole thing came out was that the Chinese embassy sent a strongly worded letter, I think, or made a big deal.
They're good at that, aren't they?
Yes, exactly. They sent a letter on January 21st, posted on Twitter. So basically they demanded, or it was a formal complaint of 44 instances of extortion against more than 60 Chinese nationals at Jakarta airport, Jakarta's main airport. So it's super sad to see, people abuse power. And I imagine in this case, they saw people who didn't speak good English, maybe who hadn't traveled that much. And they thought, presumably, maybe it wasn't even, any blackmail or a threat. They just said, oh, there's this additional fee that you didn't know about, that you have to pay to get in.
That's what. So I tried to read a little deeper into this beyond just what the main headlines were saying, and from what I could understand, then I had to translate a few of these articles. From what I could understand, this was to do with the invention of such fees, as you like. You haven't paid this, you have to pay this. You've got to pay this now. If you don't have cash, blah blah blah, then that's a problem. We have to walk you to an ATM, that kind of thing. And so that's and predominantly happening to one nationality only, to Chinese travelers, as you said. China alerting Indonesia of this, Indonesia taking action and removing so many officers from one airport alone. Got me thinking, have you been in a scenario where you have known that that's not the case, but I might have to do it anyway, otherwise I might not get in?
To be honest, not at an airport where there's been bribery specifically, but
you haven't, for example, flown through Cairo where they've insisted you've got to give them $20 in order to go to the security queue.
So I know that certain countries don't like being criticized online, even if that criticism involves just sharing your honest experience.
I'm asking you purely about your experience. I'm not asking you. I suggested Cairo hypothetically.
Of course. So there may be some places around the world where you feel pressured to tip someone if you want something to happen. So for example, back in my 2016, 2017, when I was really roughing it and flying to places that are known for cheap fares, just to
Okay.
save, a little bit. Then
Places like
sometimes
where?
places that will not remain unnamed, but
Hold on a minute.
listen,
We are in the interest of free speech. Okay, we're all
yeah,
friends here on the podcast. In order to protect and keep our listeners vigilant, I
yeah,
think we should share where these scenarios have happened. Countries like,
yeah. Well, it's absolutely not Egypt.
okay, got it. Okay,
Absolutely not Egypt.
continue with your story.
So there a few times actually when I've been no at these places that are absolutely not Egypt. I have encountered situations where I land on one ticket
Yeah,
and I'm connecting to another flight on another ticket, but I don't want to leave, clear immigration and have to pay for a visa, for example, and then check in.
right.
So you usually go to a transit desk, right? But there have been several instances in some places where I land, I go to the transit desk, and it takes. I give the details, but then nothing happens. There was one time I had to wait for several hours for the
What?
guy just sitting there doing.
How long was your
Yes,
connection?
soon. I mean, it was like 5 hours my connection. So
Right.
soon, no problem. So eventually, I was like, "Is there like a fee or something I can pay to expedite this process?"
Goodness.
Yeah. And then I think it worked out. And I also caused a bit of a scene. But yeah, I mean, there's never been a situation where I felt like I had to do something to get out. And now when I go to
So you
certain places,
voluntarily, hold on. So just in that scenario, you voluntarily offered
I
some
think that's
kind of
I think
fee in
that's
order to
honestly
get it
more
moving along.
common that people won't ask, but it will be kind of like, if you want me to do
Expect.
this, you need to, step up or I won't do it. And you'll notice eventually. So yeah,
Yeah.
of course we hate that when that happens. It hasn't happened to me in a long time because I don't go to those types of places. And if I do, like last time I went to one of those places, I just paid for a visa, entered, and then
Yeah, that's, I
just
mean, if
got it
that's,
over
if
with.
that's like, if that's the straightforward way, then
Yeah,
yeah.
but then there's
Go on.
other things like you having to. Some of these airports have like 5 security checks if
Yeah.
you are, first to enter the country and then to leave. So it's just a huge
Yeah.
pain. And even I have to
Yeah.
say with India, where I just was in Bangalore, transiting there is a huge headache, especially if you're
Yeah.
on separate tickets. So even if like you're landing and you're connecting to Air India, they make it almost impossible. So there as well, I just applied for a 5-year visa, which I now have. So I can just, anytime I need to, I don't
That's
need to
good.
worry because the visa application is
Yeah. Easy.
really
Easy.
thorough. No, it's not
Yeah.
easy. It's very, very
No, 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 no.
not easy.
It's now
Yeah,
easy that you have the 5-year visa, right?
exactly. So then I know I don't have to, there's never been any bribery in India, by the way, but just that, then I know I just enter. I don't have to stress if they're going to let me get my transit boarding pass or not and
Yeah.
deal with everything. So what about you?
I was trying to think this when we were discussing it earlier, and I was thinking the only time it happened blatantly is the first ever time, maybe over 10 years ago, that I went to Jordan and arrived at about 2 o'clock in the morning in Amman airport. And as I was walking to immigration, and I can see the immigration is set up kind of clearly there. Then then it says like for Jordanian nationals and residents, left, for visitor foreign arrivals, right. So I'm like, ready to go towards the right, and I was completely ambushed, stopped by these 3 guys in uniform who were like, oh, you need to you will take a visa on arrival, and I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you need to come with us. You need to get cash for the thing. You have to take cash from this machine, blah, blah, blah. I was like, I have cash, because I didn't have cash, and I knew that you could pay by card. I was like, I
Yeah.
have cash. And they were saying, no. There's no, you have to come with us. Visa on arrival, yes? I'm like, yes. Okay, come with us. And they were just trying to take me away from the path that I was following to immigration. And I'm looking at these guys, don't know who they work for, don't know. And, we're savvy travelers, right? I
Yeah.
know better than to go with them. And so I can see, and they're like, go, come on. And one of the guys like shouted like, Yalla, to them. And he was at a foreign exchange kiosk right? So basically they were nothing to do with immigration. They wanted me to go put my card in the machine.
Yeah.
They would get whatever commission or whatever, and just to take out currency in Jordan.
Or they would
in order
skim your card. I mean, who knows?
Right. Or there could have been something with a card and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I wasn't going near them, and I was saying like, no. And I'm continuing straight. And they were shouting and throwing themselves in front of me and saying that, no, you will see, you're crazy, huh? You're not listening to us. When you go to the immigration now, they will not let you. You have to come here and pay with the cash. And I'm like, I have cash. And how much cash you have? Oh, right. We're discussing this now, are we? So I was, just trying. And it really took like a good 10 minutes to try to shake them off of trying to pester me, to which I then saw them target this like blonde lady who was also on the flight from London, and they go straight to her. And as I was queuing then in the small zigzags for immigration, I was watching them and I was like, oh, this is what they're doing. They're just, anyone that doesn't look like they're from the Arab world, they were targeting and trying to get them to go over to this. So that's kind of the most I experienced in the region, at least, of that. It's never happened to me in Asia. It hasn't even happened to me across the continent of Africa. In the US don't bother doing that because instead they punish you with a 3-hour queue on arrival anyway. Yeah. And in Frankfurt, the worst that happened is that they refused to stamp where I told them to stamp on a very full passport where there were 2 empty spaces, remember? 2 empty spaces, and they wouldn't do it. And they were like, nope, you can't leave. I'm like, so you want me to stay? Because last time I checked, the opposite of everyone's desire with immigration is that you want people to stay. I thought the idea is you let them leave. I'm trying to leave. So yeah, that's kind of, thankfully, as much as I've experienced in that kind of, in that scope. People have reported that it happens in Thailand quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah, but I've never seen anything online. But I've just heard anecdotally of like friends or neighbors that have been to Thailand, and they feel that the immigration officers have been a bit tricky with them. I've never believed it because I've never heard it from frequent travelers. I mean, you go to Thailand all the time. You've never...
I've been like... sometimes I've cleared Thai immigration like 30 times. It's never happened, but... I do suspect maybe there is some cherry picking of which races to target if they do stuff. Right. And potentially, I mean, I know they're very strict in Thai immigration, like surprisingly so. They also ask me a million questions when I come, but I've always had good experiences landing in the land of smiles, baby.
I think that to shift this into a wider conversation about immigration, right? I think that any country's national priority, when they put together their Vision 2030s, Vision 2040s, their scopes for what they want to, and we're talking about countries that have goals. We're not talking about countries that are in decay, like the UK, for example, but we're talking about countries that have vision and plans. The first ever interaction a visitor has with that country, 9 times out of 10, is at the border. And I just think for that reason, there should be so much focus on it being pleasant. Doesn't mean not being strict, doesn't mean not following the rules to a T, doesn't mean not dotting the I's and all that, but it means ensuring that person isn't either terrified or made to feel rubbish in that scenario by somebody who's abrupt or mood or miserable or blah, 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 because it really is that first interaction. And often it's the last interaction as well when the passenger leaves, if there's immigration to leave. So it's first and last, and I just think there's so much effort that should be paid there.
But I mean, Oscar and I always say out of 100 countries visited, like 98, the most unpleasant, rude people you come across in that country on your entire stay is always immigration. Although I will say the most shocking immigration experience I've ever had, I don't remember if I shared this on the podcast, is Saudi Arabia. Do you remember me telling you about that?
Yes.
Just when we landed and it was... first of all, we were like, are we allowed to go up to the women? They're like, come. And they're the most delightful, talkative, funny women in immigration who are just like, oh, welcome to Saudi Arabia. Oh my gosh, it's my first time meeting a Swede. Like all this stuff. So it was just like the best.
That's good because look at that.
Surprising welcome.
Saudi Arabia is literally the textbook example of a country that has all these visions to try to build itself and increase tourism and blah, blah, blah. And for all the things that there is problematic and the ongoings that are problematic in Saudi Arabia, they are putting in such an effort to welcome the world. So good that you had that. You described it as a shocking experience, and that's because it went against any narrative or stereotype that maybe you had in your head prior to arrival.
Exactly. And this was early 2022. Just the idea
That's
of,
really good.
women didn't even have jobs in Saudi Arabia 5 or 10 years before that. So then to me, my first interaction with a Saudi in Saudi Arabia to be a woman was awesome. And
That's really good.
There's one last story before we get to Q&A that I just think is so, I don't know if I should say fun, but it's about a woman in Malaysia. So listen, AirAsia, don't sleep on AirAsia. They're, in my opinion, the best low-cost airline in the world.
Okay.
So there's a woman who works at AirAsia who lives in Penang. Okay. Of course, AirAsia is based in Kuala Lumpur, hence the background for today's episode if you're watching us in video. She flies every single day, 5 days a week from her home in Penang to Kuala Lumpur to get to work. So she wakes up at 4 a.m. and gets home around 7. And that includes this 1 hour flight each way, which is, it's just a remarkable story because you hear about people who I think I even met someone who lives in Texas. This was back in the late 2010s, but flew to San Francisco a few times a week for work or something, which I'm like, okay, like even doing that several times a week is a lot. It's like a 3.5 hour flight, but sure. But for this woman to have a setup where permanently, not only for a short while, she's flying and 2 hours a day seems wild on the surface. But I thought there was so much about the story that when you think about it, starts to make sense. For example, Kuala Lumpur is a city that is very far from its airport. If you're going to drive, it takes an hour. So at that point, if you want to live in the actual city of Kuala Lumpur, you're going to be spending almost an hour in some form of transport to get to work. And keep in mind, the AirAsia office is at the airport. So once she lands, she's at the office.
She's right there. Yeah.
It's
but there's
a lot of money.
I know women
That's the point of this.
I know women at Lufthansa Technik who commute every day.
From where?
Let me get this right. From which Lufthansa Technik was I at? Okay, I think it's from Hamburg to Frankfurt or vice versa.
That makes sense. But that's really by plane.
Yeah.
Because she gets standby, I guess, so it's cheap.
Yeah, and I remember, she was calling her daughter saying, hey, okay, sure, okay, I'll be home for dinner, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, every day. She's like, every day.
And
now, that's a short flight, okay?
Yeah. But what is when you hear this, what do you think? Yeah. Do you think that's awesome or do you shudder?
I think it's not great because here's why. They're standing around at the gate. They're boarding, but they're not boarding. The scrum of passengers trying to get on because they're only doing it for the first time for that few months, but you're doing it every single day. The safety briefing twice a day, every day. Yeah. The checks for seatbelts, mandatory, but every day, twice a day. Yeah. That's a lot of like clutter around the head and the mind. Whereas, if you do compare it to being on a train or in a car for an hour, you're typically in silence or you control the environment. You're not being now shuffle through to this, now shuffle through to that. Also, if I'm commuting every day, for example, from Hamburg to Frankfurt and I'm on a remote stand, forget it. Forget it. You just added a bus into the mix. Yeah.
You'd get a coupon membership with the Frankfurt VIP services to get through quicker. But
100%. Well, you'll sort that out. It's
exactly.
Use the code Hello Dan for 75% off a Frankfurt VIP service.
I wish. But
so do I.
I mean so I was trying to think what scenarios, because this to me sounds like an absolute nightmare. I love flying, but needing to fly every single day and dealing with delays, especially the number of times
delays.
The number of times she's probably been on the plane, they've boarded, and then, there's something wrong. If you fly twice a day, 5 days a week, that is bound to happen a lot, And then in addition to that, a bus, a train, I would say is better. The only scenario where I would say maybe taking an AirAsia or a Lufthansa flight might be preferable to this would be an hour plus on the New York subway each direction every day.
Yeah.
Because we're talking crazy people. We're talking about a train that's so loud you can go deaf. You hear the screeches. There's no sound isolation. You might have to stand. It's super bumpy. There's rats on the tracks. You have to worry about someone pushing you onto the tracks when there's an incoming train.
New York, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, greatest city on earth. Yet I still think it is like the greatest city on earth. But anyway, it's that is the one scenario where I'm like, okay, maybe flying is more civilized, but any other metro system, the London Tube, although the Tube is not great, it's definitely more civilized than New York. A bus in London. Forget about Asia. If you live by a metro in Asia, that's going to be 10 times more relaxing and good for your sanity and mental health than taking 2 flights a day. So.
Very true. Very, very true. I think we're both aligned there. Good luck to the lady who does that, and good for her. But yeah, not for us. Not if it was mandatory daily. Definitely not. Shall we move into Q&A?
Let's do it.
Okay, we've got a very long question from Ravin, and I'm not going to read it yet because we're going to save it as part of an Australia segment that we have coming up, where we're going to look at the shifting state of play there in Australia, and we will include, Ravin, your question that is regarding to the changes that have happened at Qantas and Virgin Australia in that episode. So stay tuned there. Let me then move on to a question here from Clinton. He says, "Hi Alex, hope you're well. As much as it is great to see Boom Supersonic XB-1 aircraft making her first supersonic flight last week, will this project, Boom Supersonic, really allow the average business class passenger the opportunity to travel on the Overture aircraft, which is basically, for a lot of people that don't know, it is like the modern day son of Concorde that is in the works by a US startup called Boom, who have been making progress as recently as last week with that first flight. And as recently as this morning, they've been engaging with the Trump administration, and specifically Elon Musk, who is now speaking on behalf of the Trump administration, telling him, the CEO Blake, on Twitter, that he's going to remove the law in the US remove the US federal law at the moment that prohibits supersonic flying at any noise level. He's going to remove that in order to let Boom have faster progress. So, but we'll discuss that when we get a bit more on that. That was just a tweet from Elon Musk in the middle of the night, speaking on behalf of the Trump administration. #democracy. When we look at Clinton's question, he says, do we really think that the average business class passenger will have the opportunity to travel on Overture, basically meaning that the same price? Well, what do you think?
Well, it depends on how much this average business class passenger is spending, but presumably Boom will be expensive, and it's going to operate in the most expensive markets in the world. So if it was operating from Munich to Bangalore, we might all get a decent deal, but it's going to be London to New York and New York to Paris and that type of stuff. So in that case, the prices will be high, probably comparable to first class. So maybe
that's what I think.
Maybe about 10,000 or so round trip, $10,000, I would guess, $5,000 each way, which then it's up to you. If you want the time savings, do it. It's an incredible bucket list experience if this becomes reality, but I doubt it will be accessible to most people. So it's not some game-changing, fantastic news for 99.99% of flyers.
I agree, but it is still a cool project, and we will do a deeper dive into Boom very soon. Inez has asked a question. She says, I love the podcast with you, so kindly share this. Oh, she said, hi, Alex, I love the podcast. You so kindly share with Dan. My kind of opening line. Inez says, I had a question about losing items. Have either of you left an item on an aircraft and have an anecdote to share from it? She says that for me, I had left my iPad in the seat pocket of BA Club Europe flying from Algiers to Gatwick and freaked out. But the staff at the airport and BA themselves were really accommodating. We managed to locate it the very next day. Have you had examples of this? You know what's funny? Funny that Ines says this, because for the first time I've heard this announcement. I don't know if this was standard or this was just the crew that were operating. But when I flew yesterday, one of the crew members ended the flight by saying, we're arriving now onto stand. She said, please do double check for your belongings around you, which is standard. And then she said, as crew, we always find iPads, glasses, AirPods, phones, passports. She was like, we find it all. And it's amazing how much passengers do leave behind. So please, can you just take this moment right now to check that you have everything? And kind of everyone laughed, and it did make you listen. The moment they break from the norm and you end up thinking, hold on a minute, that's normal language. That's not the script.
Yeah, I love when they do that.
Yeah. So what do you think? Have you ever, you're far too organized to have done that, surely.
Back in 2018, 19, I had a bit of an era of forgetting my GoPro on flights. I think it happened 3 times. Luckily.
Sorry. Did you say you had an era or
an era? Like an era.
There was a whole era of it.
Like it was like in 1 year it happened 3 times. It never happened before, hasn't happened since.
God.
But
an era.
Luckily it was only ever in East Asia. And of course, there you can trust people won't be stealing stuff. So every single time I realized as soon as I got off, every single time, like literally at the gate. So I would just tell them, oh my God, I forgot this camera on board. Please help. And every single time they would go get it for me and I would have it 5 minutes later. So I'm just lucky it was there. But I've had friends who have, or my brother, I think I told, or maybe I didn't tell this, but he forgot his laptop on an American Airlines flight. And I was like, you are screwed. Like the fact that you forgot it on a 737 in Chicago, good luck getting that back. And he realized like an hour later when he was sitting on his connection. So by some miracle, American Airlines found it and sent it to him in the mail. So he got it about 2 weeks later, but I was so impressed to hear that. Then on the other end of the spectrum, which I imagine this is extremely rare, but I had a friend who flew Qatar, Q Suite, forgot her Insta360 and it was gone. Like it was completely cleaning, didn't find it. So she never got it back, which I was like, I would not expect this. And I doubt this is the norm there, but
did she follow up properly? I mean, they probably went through all the,
Yeah, she said she did, and they said they hadn't found it. So, and she's sure where she put it. But anyway, that was just super unlucky for her, I think. But what about you?
Yeah. The other day, not the other day, a few weeks ago, landing, left a full, this is nothing, right? But this was enough to freak me out. So I had a full bottle of water unopened, right? I put it next to me and I was so thirsty. And once I disembarked, I go for the water and I'm like, oh my God, I left the water on the aircraft. And that's not why I freaked out. I freaked out because I thought, what if it wasn't the water? Or what if it was something else? I couldn't believe that, knowing I'd been careful enough to know I was taking the water with me, that I couldn't believe I'd forgotten it, thinking, what if that was my AirPods or my iPad or my whatever, I mean, it wouldn't have been, thankfully, but yeah, that was enough to.
You're like, excuse me, to get me going. I forgot my water on board. Can you just...
It's actually a water that the airline provided to me. So,
Are you able to just go return that to me?
Yeah, I don't like to waste, and not with what's happening globally with the water shortage.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Can you imagine? I bet this has happened, that sometime someone has emailed like BA and been like, excuse me, I forgot the complimentary economy class headphones on board. Are you able to send those?
BA give those the dried sweet corn thing.
Yeah. I forgot it in the seat back. Can you just mail it to me?
Imagine.
Okay, so I just have a question here that I know we can't really answer, but Caleb asks, with the Air Busan banned power banks on all flights after a fire broke out on an A321 while it was just about to push back. First power bank ban in the world on an aircraft. What are your thoughts, and why do they only seem to short and catch fire on planes? I think hi to guest host Alex from me. Demoted because I haven't got a reply to my DMs from him.
What?
Caleb, you're always welcome in my DMs. But unfortunately, though, we cannot answer your question because we don't know, but we need to ask some very technical person who understands power banks and who understands the pressure of aircraft and stuff. Because I assume it has something to do with that. But this happened on the ground before they even changed altitude. So in Busan or in the Air Busan situation.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I think that the reason why we only hear about it happening on aircraft is because it is that time where power banks are packed in, right, between layers of clothing or squash at the bottom of the backpack. Maybe in other areas of society, it's not as condensed. In
and
everyday life, I'm not sure.
And it's also like the one place where a fire is absolutely catastrophic. While if it happens on a bus or something, yes, it's bad, but I don't think it would make headlines all over the world, you know?
Yeah. I agree.
So who knows? I'm curious
Please
as well.
Feel free to send in your questions to Dan and I, and we will tackle them and get to them.
Please do. And I just have to give a quick thank you to everyone for your wonderful feedback on last week's episode. We got such nice compliments. And also my friend Isabel, whose dad was the one with the first class, she said it was amazing. So just shout out to Isabel for giving so much praise. I feel very proud how we managed to deliver on such a sensitive topic in a balanced way.
Good. Yeah, good. I think we had a really good discussion. Listening back to it, it was good. So yeah, pleased that the listeners felt the same. We will join you same time, same place next week, and you can find us across anywhere that you can get your podcast. You will find On Air with Dan and Alex. If you haven't yet given us a rating on the likes of Spotify or Apple, just go on and select 5 stars, assuming you think it's 5 stars. If you think it's 4 stars, talk to us about it first before you click, and we'll try and bring you over to the 5-star area.
Yes,
and
please do. It takes just a second. So especially on Spotify, it's like ding, and you're done. So yeah, on that note, we will see you all next week on air. Bye bye.
See you later.